A protracted lockdown could see the UK economy shrink by more than a third this quarter. It could also increase unemployment by over 2 million and could send the budget deficit to its highest since World War II. Now, this dire scenario from the Office for Budget Responsibility comes also as the IMF warned that the British economy is on course to contract more this year than it did when the financial crisis was raging. Well, joining us this morning is Mel Stride. He's chair of the UK Treasury Committee. Mel Stride, thank you for joining us. This is worrying. It's worrying across the world, and many people will also be concerned about going back home and worried about their jobs. What are the key questions that you want answered? Do you think the government and officials are doing enough? Or are they doing too little?
Well, I think firstly what I would say about the OBR's view here is that this is not a forecast. This is what they're calling an illustrative scenario based on if the lockdown in its current form persists for a whole quarter, and then for the following quarter there's an easing out of that lockdown. What do they think would happen to the economy? And the interesting thing actually is that whilst they are saying that they would see a very substantial short-term contraction in UK GDP by some 35%, they would equally be expecting at this stage that the economy would bounce back very rapidly, and that over the course of the next couple of quarters, actually, the economy would emerge roughly on the kind of trend that they were predicting before the coronavirus struck the United Kingdom. So there's a huge assumption based in that we're going to get this strong bounce back, and a lot of people would say that is over-optimistic. But what really matters now, I think, from government's point of view, to come to your question, is what kind of support does government give during that period of the steep downturn to try and maximise the probability that we come out of it very, very strongly. And that then comes down to the various measures around soft loans, for example, that the government and the Bank of England have been underwriting. That's up to 80% guarantees on those loans for small businesses. It's also around how do you protect people's jobs. So what the government has introduced is something called a furlough scheme, which means that instead of laying off workers and making them redundant, firms are able to essentially park them still as employees but not working, and then with the government actually paying a proportion of their wages, and similar kind of support for the self-employed workers, of whom there are around 5 million in the UK.
Mel Stride, are there critical areas in the economy that need the attention? I don't know whether it's areas that have been forgotten. I know you also want to speak to insurers. What are we missing? What else needs to be done to make sure that these businesses basically don't go bust?
Okay, so the big challenge is that we are, and it's an overused term, but it's an appropriate term, we are in unprecedented times. So, for example, where the government has underwritten wages in the economy here, that will apply probably to around 10 million workers. And one of the challenges is you have to have a system of getting that money out there. Some of it is in place through our existing tax system. However, you have to do a lot of work to get an input, an intervention at that kind of scale. And what happens when governments get into these positions, and we're seeing this worldwide, is two things. One is that the policies tend to be a little too blunt, so they have hard edges which need to be worked on and refined through time, but there is very little time. So, for example, when I mentioned getting soft loans out to businesses, the experience in the UK has been that has not been happening fast enough, and the government's had to react and adjust the policy in that area. And the second thing is that it's all moving so quickly and at such scale that the delivery is a major issue. So when you look at those furloughed workers scheme, our tax authorities here are saying that they expect or aim to be in a position by the end of this month to be paying out for about 10 million people who have been parked on a furlough scheme in the UK. That's a very big ask because it involves a big IT project. It involves a huge number of individuals and interactions, and it means government moving at pace. And therein lie the challenges. So what my committee is doing is looking very closely at those issues to see what progress can be made.
I know you've asked the Association of British Insurers to provide evidence to the committee. Do you worry that if clients have asked payout of claims, that if these claims are paid out, if the government isn't more involved, there's going to be a systemic issue with insurance?
No, I don't think that's going to happen because when it comes to most business interruption policies that businesses and others have entered into with the insurance sector, typically this kind of event has been excluded, and I don't think my committee will be seeking, some kind of blanket retrospective revision of those policies, and that would be the kind of moves that I think would cause, shall we say, inordinate stress on the insurance sector. But we're not in that situation. What the committee is more interested in is making sure that where it's a little bit grey between as to why a business had to close down, was it due to the virus, or what was the government's particular approach at that point, what was the government saying to business at that point, whether they should shut or not, or they did it of their own volition. When you get into those kind of grey areas, we think it's very important that the insurance companies step up to the plate and help those businesses.